Hello, I'm Murray Dron and we're at Stamford Bridge, the home of European champions Chelsea, to discuss the Goal.com 50, a list of the world's top footballers from the last 12 months, as voted by all of Goal.com's editions. Here to cast their expert eye over the list are three Goal.com heavyweights. In one corner to my right is Peter Staunton, one of Goal.com's analysts. In the opposite corner, Carlo Garganese. He's probably here to disagree with everything Peter says, and mediating with me in the middle and keeping control of the squabble is Goal.com's managing editor, Amar Singh. OK, and up for discussion first are the players that are on the list from 50 to 4, 25 of which are making their first appearance on the list. So let's bring in Peter straight away. Pete, why so many new players?
Well, I think you'd have to look around the leagues around Europe to see that a lot of the traditional, the bigger teams, they haven't managed to win the league this year. And I think placing on this list has a lot to do with how successful your team has been. As you can see, you know, in Italy, Inter no longer the dominant force that they once were. Bayern Munich obviously are playing second fiddle to Dortmund at the moment, and you know, of course, Real Madrid have finally managed to overthrow Barcelona. That's not even to mention the Manchester clubs in England.
And in Italy, historically, Juventus have always been the biggest team. They've won more titles than any team in Italy. But since the Calciopoli crisis in 2006, they've really struggled. The last two seasons, they haven't qualified for the Champions League. But in 2011-2012, they got their house in order under new coach Conte, won Serie A, went the whole season unbeaten, and as a result, they've got 4 players represented in the Goal.com 50. And I think in other leagues as well, in France, Montpellier were shock winners, so they've been represented in the Goal.com 50 as well. And like Peter said, there's been a few shocks throughout Europe.
It's also worth pointing out, Peter, that obviously it's a European Championship, so the majority of the players are probably going to come from Europe, and lack of South American this time around.
Yeah, obviously with no continental competition in South America this year, it's been difficult for South Americans to make an impression outside the European leagues. And as you say, with the European Championships fresh in everybody's mind, you know, that obviously brings with it the more prominent players from that tournament rather than from anywhere else. But as Amar pointed out, it's good to see representation from the African Cup of Nations and also from the Asian Confederation. So you've got players like Shinji Kagawa in there for his exploits with Japan and Borussia Dortmund, players like Youssef Msakni in there, who's played with Esperance Tunis and for Tunisia, and of course Chris Katonga, who's had a magnificent run at the African Nations Cup in January, and led Zambia to an historic title. And
also Emerson from Corinthians, who was instrumental in Corinthians winning the Copa Libertadores. And I think when you think of Brazilian players, Emerson is, I think most people would, I mean, he was even unknown to me really until a few months ago. So it's nice to see a name like Emerson in there as well. Yeah,
that's the I think the local perspective that the Goal.com 50 can bring, because I think if you ask any European to name even a player from the Brazilian league, they're going to tell you Neymar. But of course we've got you know, the local perspective which puts Emerson from Corinthians higher than the most recognisable name in the league, which is Neymar.
Neymar 36, Emerson up at 32. A lot of people, as you say, outside of that region will be surprised to hear that, won't they? Any players that surprise you that they're on the list?
Not necessarily on the list, but I think some players I would say are probably a little bit too high. Karim Benzema from France, who's placed 16th on the list. Obviously he had a fantastic club season. He scored 32 goals, 15 assists. He won the La Liga title with Real Madrid. But I think for someone who flopped so disastrously at the Euros with France, didn't score a goal, was poor in every single game, to be 16th on the list and to have played so badly at the Euros, for me, he was the flop of the tournament. I think probably a little bit too high. And I think for Real Madrid, winning La Liga was more of a team effort for Real Madrid last season. With the exception of Ronaldo, I think he was probably the only individual that really stood out at that Real Madrid team. I think the rest of the achievement was down to the team. So I think Benzema's maybe about 10 places too high for me.
I disagree. I think he was the best, probably the best out-and-out striker in Europe, or one of the best out-and-out strikers in Europe last season. I think the fact that Real Madrid won La Liga, they wouldn't have been able to do that without Benzema. Yes, you've got Cristiano Ronaldo. Yes, he broke all sorts of records. But Karim Benzema was outstanding for Real Madrid when it mattered. And more importantly, he also kept Gonzalo Higuain out of the team. Gonzalo Higuain's goals to games ratio is incredible. And the fact that Mourinho chose him first, I think he deserves to be there. Now, it didn't really work out for France. in the end of the Euros. And yes, he disappointed, but should a player be punished, on this list and moved down because of the tournament? We see a lot of players getting a bounce from having performed at the Euros because of the time of the voting. But for me, Benzema delivered week in, week out in La Liga, and I think he deserves to be where he is.
But who catches your eye for being slightly higher than you think they should be?
Well, for me, I've selected one of the more high-profile players on the list. He comes in at number 13, and it's Mario Balotelli. Now, for me, I know Balotelli. He was magnificent against Germany in the semi-final of the European Championships. But aside from that, you really have to struggle to see where his contributions lay for Manchester City this season. In fact, coming towards the end of the season, he was such a destructive presence that he was almost banished entirely from the first team operations by Roberto Mancini. He was sent off against Arsenal, which cost Man City points, and they were very lucky after that game to manage to overhaul Man United to win the league. He had a violent conduct charge against Spurs in January. He was sent off against Liverpool, and I do think that he presses that self-destruct button a little bit too much, and I don't think that he has the talent to merit the indulgence that he's been offered. And I think just for the fact that he appears on the front page as well as the back page in the press, I don't think that's enough for him to rank where he ranked.
Okay, so while we're on the subject of Italy, Andrea Pirlo's pretty high up there. He's 5th on the list. We won't bring Carlo in on this because he's a massive Juventus fan. Won't admit it, but he is. Amar, is that justified, 5th?
It's great to see Pirlo there. It restores your faith in football. It's a wonderful story. The fact that he left Milan and he was such a hero to those fans in Milan, and a lot of people wrote him off and didn't think that he could go to Juventus and really deliver the goods, and he completely delivered the goods. He was so key to Juventus winning the Scudetto last season. And furthermore, he then goes to the Euros, and with the final excluded, he completely lights up the whole tournament. For me, Pirlo, the sort of player that he is, really, you can't compare him to a lot of other players in the world. He's a delight to watch. Any football lover, will tell you that Pirlo is just one of the greatest players to enjoy. And so, personally, I'm really happy to see him up there in 5th.
You alluded to it earlier, Amar. There's some big players missing from this list, aside of the sort of ones that are slightly less celebrated. Schneider, for one. Why is that, do you think?
Absolutely. Well, Schneider and Inter have had a very poor season. Netherlands, of course, had a disastrous European Championships. Other players missing, notable players, David Villa, for example. A lot of that's down to injury. Carlos Puyol, also down to injury, I'd say. A lot of big names that you expect to see there every year. Steven Gerrard, Luis Suarez, for example. We know he had a very difficult season with his ban, and so there's a lot of big names missing, and a lot of players from smaller clubs or less noted clubs like Borussia Dortmund. And it'd be interesting to see next season, if Bayern Munich are able to wrestle back the initiative in the Bundesliga, whether the likes of Piszczek and Lewandowski, and Hummels, whether they can actually stay on that list and maintain that level that they had in their championship-winning season. Absolutely,
I agree, but I do think that the beauty of having this annual award means that when a player plays well for a season, he tends to have that recognition at the end of that particular season, because in the cases of Lewandowski, in the cases of Kagawa, in the case of Piszczek, if they don't get picked this year, then when will they get picked? So it is good, even at the expense of the likes of Schneider and at the expense of as you said, the likes of Steven Gerrard, despite his understated season, I would say, this year.
Not at the expense of Daniele De Rossi, who I think it's absurd that he didn't make the list.
Let's round up the top 50 then. Down to 4 at least. Andreas Iniesta tops the list. Consistent performer, isn't he, Carlo? Perhaps surprising he didn't squeeze into the top 3?
A little bit surprising, yes. I think Iniesta, again, is one of these players who always saves his best for the big occasion, doesn't necessarily score too many goals, but when he does score, when he does create goals, they always seem to be at the most important times. 2010 World Cup final, of course, he scored the winner. And at Euro 2008, for me, he was Spain's best player. When they were struggling in the group stages, he was the one that was really dragging them by the scruff of the neck. And then through into the knockouts as well, he was outstanding. Probably been penalised by the fact that Barcelona didn't win a major trophy, and in any personal awards, trophies are very important.
Okay, so Andreas Iniesta finishes 4th, just outside the top 3. Next time we discuss which players have finished in the top 3 of the Goal.com 50, and there is one surprise in there.
YouTube.com/goal is full of stuff like this and proper football too. To make sure you don't miss out, just hit the subscribe button.